Rain fell that night like the sky was finally confessing its sins. Every drop hit the pavement with a memory of someone's scream, someone's lie, someone's last breath. On Alder Creek Street, the lamps flickered in perfect rhythm, as if they already knew what was about to happen. The neighborhood looked peaceful, white fences, trimmed lawns, the quiet hum of sprinklers, but behind every curtain, guilt had a name. One by one, the lights in every house went out. Except one. Inside that house, a man stood drenched in sweat, staring at a letter written in red ink. You buried her wrong. He thought he'd buried his past under the lake, but the lake remembered. He thought the HOA's rules would protect him, but rules can't silence the dead. That night, when the wind howled through the empty streets, it wasn't just the storm speaking, it was her. The girl they tried to forget. The one who drowned, the one whose body was never found, the one who came back not for justice, but for revenge. And when her voice finally whispered through the rain, "Do you remember me, Mr. Ellison?" Every porch light in Alder Creek flickered red. The house on Alder Creek. Rain slid down the driveways of Alder Creek like veins of guilt. The neighborhood still looked perfect, trimmed lawns, white fences, shining mailboxes, but perfection was a lie, and lies had started to rot. At house number 14, Mark Ellison, HOA president, buttoned his collar in front of the mirror. His reflection looked neat, respectable, dependable, the very image the HOA demanded. But on the dresser beside him lay a half-burned envelope. The words had survived the flame. "You buried her wrong," Mark whispered to the mirror. "Just a prank." But the mirror didn't blink back. It dripped. One drop of water slid down the glass, slow and deliberate, though the air was dry.
"You burned the letter, Mark, but not the truth. The lake remembers the firelight on your face. It remembers the weight of your hands on my shoulders, the push, the splash, the silence that followed. Every reflection you see is me, waiting for you to look too long."
At 9 a.m., the HOA hall filled with chatter. The smell of coffee mixed with disinfectant and unease. Banners declared, "Quarterly HOA Assembly. Together we thrive." Mark stepped to the podium. "Before we begin, there's been an incident by the lake. Please remain calm. The authorities have it under control." Elena Vasquez sat near the back. The color had drained from her since the night her daughter vanished. "Is it another accident, Mr. Ellison?" she asked, voice trembling. Mark's knuckles whitened around his notes. "We don't know yet." Paul Dawson, retired detective, leaned forward. "I saw the tape. Police don't block a trail for an accident." The room quieted. The only sound was the rain, faint against the hall windows, tapping like fingers. Mark cleared his throat. "Speculation won't help. Let's focus on community matters." From the far wall, Lena Chun adjusted her small camera. The red light blinked, recording.
"You hate being recorded, don't you, Mark? You erased me from every file, every meeting note, every memory. But pixels remember what people forget. And tonight, I'll make every screen in this neighborhood flicker with my name."
The meeting ended early. People left in clusters whispering. Paul Dawson stayed behind, hand resting on the back of a chair. "You were at the lake that night," he said quietly. Mark turned, mask of calm. "Paul, you're chasing ghosts." Paul smiled grimly. "Then why are you sweating?" Outside, thunder rolled again. At the Vasquez home, candles glowed before a framed photo. Elena at 16, dark hair curling around her smile. Maria whispered, "Come home, mi vida." The TV murmured, "Police still investigating the Alder Creek incident." She switched it off. The silence was heavier than sound, then a soft drip. Drip, drip. Water trailed from the door to the hallway. Maria followed it to Elena's room. The window was locked, yet the bedspread was damp. On the pillow lay a small, wet handprint.
"Mama, don't cry. I'm still here." The rain is how I knock now. Every drop that touches your cheek is me trying to say I never wanted to go swimming that night.
Across the street, the Chuns reviewed security footage. Timestamp, 2:46 a.m. Rain blurred the image, but then a figure appeared on the dock. Barefoot, hair whipped by wind, necklace glowing blue. Lena Chun froze the frame. Her hands shook. "It's her," she whispered. The girl on screen turned to face the camera. Her lips moved, forming a word the microphone couldn't catch. Then lightning flashed, and behind her stood another figure. Tall male, motionless. Mark Ellison.
Caught in pixels, frozen between frames. You can delete the video, Mark, but you can't erase the reflection behind you. Every storm is a rewind button. Every flash is the moment before I fell again.
That evening, Mark returned home. Julia Ellison scrubbed the floor with harsh chemicals, as if she could wash away a memory. "Did you tell them?" she asked. "Tell who what?" "The truth." Mark laughed nervously. "There's no truth to tell." Julia looked up. "Then why is there water in the hall again?" He turned. Small bare footprints led from the kitchen to the back door. The alarm was armed. No entry detected. Julia whispered, "She's here." Mark forced a smile. "She's dead." From somewhere inside the walls, a drip answered, "No." At his office, Paul Dawson spread old files across his desk. Rain beat against the windows like a metronome. He opened a folder labeled case number 0043 Vasquez, Elena. The last line read, "Case closed, accidental drowning." Paul crossed it out with a heavy pen stroke. Case reopened. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Message, "You were right." Attachment, HOA_cam_7.mp4. He clicked play. Static, rain, lightning. Elena on the dock. A flashlight approaching. Mark Ellison's face lit for a single frame. Then darkness, and a voice, distorted but clear. "Greater than you buried her wrong." Paul leaned back, heart pounding. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Outside, the rain fell harder.
He saw it now. Someone finally saw me. The truth is, like water, it always finds a crack to escape through. And Alder Creek is nothing but cracks.
By midnight, the neighborhood slept uneasily. Porch lights blinked on and off, as if arguing with the wind. The lake gleamed dark and oily under the storm clouds. Mark stood at his window, watching the water rise. He told himself it was just rain, just a seasonal flood. But when lightning flashed again, he saw something at the dock, a girl standing ankle-deep in the water. Head tilted, eyes locked on his house. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, dripping endlessly, as if the rain couldn't wash her clean. He blinked, and she was gone. Only ripples remained.
You always loved rules, Mark, but here's a new one for your precious HOA. Rule number 1, the dead pay their dues too.
By morning, Alder Creek looked peaceful again. Fresh sunlight over wet roofs, smiles returned, false and bright. But the lake had risen an inch overnight, lapping against the dock steps. A new envelope sat in the HOA mailbox, ink bleeding through the paper like wounds that refused to close. To the president, it read. Inside, a single photograph of Elena standing on the dock, eyes open, mouth slightly smiling. Across the bottom in red letters, her handwriting. Meeting adjourned. The rain had stopped, but the lake still breathed clouds. Its surface looked like glass stretched too thin waiting to break. A single porch light blinked across the water. Inside, Mark Ellison couldn't sleep. His tie still hung on the chair like a noose he hadn't noticed he'd made. The phone on his nightstand buzzed once, then went silent. No message. Just the faint scent of damp wood drifting in through the vent, like the lake was learning how to breathe his air. At the same hour, retired Detective Paul Dawson sat at his desk. The flash drive labeled HOA_cam_7 waited beside his coffee. He hadn't told anyone he had it, not even his wife. He pressed play again, watching that blurred shape on the dock. The moment lightning flashed, the face on screen turned toward him. Mark Ellison.
You watched the screen, Mr. Dawson. You saw him. But you didn't pause soon enough. You missed the shadow behind him, the one that never left.
Paul froze the frame, rewound, leaned closer. For a fraction of a second, something behind Mark reflected light, too high to be a wave, too still to be a tree. He exhaled sharply and shut the laptop. Enough ghosts for one night, he muttered, but the words didn't sound convincing. Across town, Maria Vasquez stirred from a restless sleep. Her candle had gone out again. She swore she heard dripping in the hallway, the steady rhythm that now marked her life into hours. She followed it to the door. Another small puddle, another wet print, perfectly shaped, perfectly wrong.
Mama, don't be afraid. It's only the lake learning to walk again.
Morning brought a fog that rolled low across Alder Creek. It slid between fences, lingered over manicured lawns, and pooled around the HOA notice board like spilled smoke. The residents gathered there, drawn by habit more than interest. A new announcement fluttered in the damp breeze. Emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance, tonight, 7 p.m. Nobody had posted it. Mark arrived moments later, eyes rimmed red. He stared at the paper, but didn't touch it. Paul Dawson watched from his car, camera lens trained on the board. Behind both men, the lake rippled once no wind. By evening, the community hall smelled of metal chairs and nervous perfume. Rain tapped on the roof again, a patient finger on tin. Mark Ellison cleared his throat. "We'll begin with the usual agenda," he said. His voice fought to sound ordinary. "Budget revisions, maintenance," Paul cut him off. "Tell them about 14B. A hush, Mark blinked. "Excuse me?" "Resolution 14B, Paul said louder. "The one you found in your father's files. The one about remediation." Mark's knuckles turned white. "That document is irrelevant." "Not to the girl under your lake," Paul snapped. Gasps rippled through the room. Somewhere, a phone vibrated on a folding table. The screen lit up with a single word notification: "Remember."
They remember, Mark. Even if their mouths won't move, their bones do.
The projector at the end of the hall flickered on by itself. Nobody had plugged it in. Static snow filled the white screen, then sharpened into a video feed: black water, lightning, a girl stepping backward off the dock. Maria's scream cut through the hall before the screen even went dark. Mark stumbled away from the podium. "That footage is fake." Paul's voice was steady. "Then why do you look like you're the one about to drown?" Outside, thunder rolled over the rooftops. Inside, something metallic creaked in the vent's water or breath. Later that night, Paul drove home slow. He didn't trust his mirrors. Every reflection looked too crowded. When he parked, his porch light was already on. A single envelope rested beneath it, no address, just red letters bleeding through the paper. "Count your votes." He carried it inside, hands shaking slightly. Inside lay a photocopy of the old resolution, authorization for containment burial prior to development approval. 5 signatures. One belonged to Mark Ellison's father. Paul poured 2 fingers of whiskey and didn't drink it. "So that's what you meant," he said to the empty room. He understands now. It wasn't an accident. It was a habit. At House 14, Julia Ellison woke to the sound of the faucet running. She padded barefoot to the kitchen. The tap was closed. Still, water streamed from the sink-thin, endless silver. "Mark!" she called. He came running, eyes wild. The water stopped the moment he entered. The drain gurgled once, then silence. On the marble counter lay her phone, screen fogged, words forming on the glass from condensation. "She's not done," Julia screamed. Mark grabbed her arm. "It's just the pipes," he insisted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The next morning, the HOA mailbox overflowed with identical envelopes, each sealed in red wax shaped like a drop of water. Inside every one, the same note. HOA rule number 0, the water keeps receipts. Residents whispered about vandals. Mark announced an investigation. Paul started mapping signatures. Maria knelt by the lake every dusk, calling names only the water answered. The neighborhood returned to its routines, trash pickup, lawn trimming, pretending. Yet something subtle had shifted. Sprinklers came on at odd hours. Puddles refused to dry. Mirrors fogged even in sunlight.
I'm not everywhere, only where the truth leaks.
That night, the sky tore open. Rain hammered the roofs like a verdict. The Chun security system pinged a motion alert dock camera. 3:07 a.m. Mr. Chun rubbed his eyes, opened the feed. A single frame froze on screen. A girl standing ankle-deep at the first step, necklace shining pale blue. The timestamp blinked twice, then vanished. Down the street, Paul awoke to his own phone glowing. The same image, the same time. Beneath it, a caption he hadn't typed. "You buried her wrong." He stared at it until the battery died.
I'm learning how to speak again, one screen at a time.
Morning brought sunshine that felt borrowed. The storm drains overflowed, yet the lake's level had not dropped an inch. Mark stood on the dock, sunglasses hiding the sleepless purple beneath his eyes. Julia refused to come outside. He knelt, touched the water. "What do you want?" He whispered. For a heartbeat, the surface went still flat, black, mirror perfect. Then ripples formed words no man should see reflected. "I want you to remember." He stumbled back, nearly fell. The words dissolved. The lake smiled. By afternoon, the HOA group chat filled with speculation. Water contamination, drainage malfunction, possible prank. Nobody mentioned ghosts. Alder Creek didn't believe in ghosts. It believed in cover-ups. Paul uploaded the old resolution to a cloud drive for safety. Within minutes, the file corrupted. All that remained was the title, 14B, and a blank page that smelled faintly of algae when printed. Maria arrived at his door an hour later, clutching a jar of lake water. "It keeps refilling," she said. "I pour it out, it comes back." Paul peered inside. Something shimmered at the bottom, catching the light. A shard of blue glass. He reached to touch it. The jar cracked.
And don't touch what is mine. It cuts.
That evening, thunder grumbled far off, too tired for lightning. The HOA emergency line rang twice in every house, then stopped. Voicemail stacked with only static, then one brief phrase, the same on each recording. A girl's voice threaded through rain. "See you at the next meeting." And at the edge of the lake, a new sign had appeared overnight, same font, same format as the official ones. HOA notice, community event rescheduled, location, Lakeside Dock, time, 3:07 a.m. No one admitted printing it. No one tore it down. Alder Creek slept with lights on that night. The lake did not. By noon, the sign was gone, not torn down, gone. The plastic post left a perfect hole in the softened grass, as tidy as a pulled tooth. People drove their golf carts by the lakeside and pretended not to slow. Children were kept inside with streaming shows turned high to hide the way the pipes sometimes hummed like far-off sirens. Mark Ellison wore a jacket he hoped read, "Steadfast and not afraid." He stood at the water's edge and nodded along while a contractor in a yellow vest explained shoreline stabilization, with a lot of numbers that didn't touch the only number that mattered, 3:07. Julia watched him from the porch, arms wrapped tight against a daylight chill. She was still barefoot, as if the floor might open if she put on shoes. On the glass door in front of her, someone had traced a circle with two short lines like a clock without hands. When she wiped it away, it reappeared a few inches lower, as if written by someone too short to reach higher. Across the cul-de-sac, Paul Dawson spread 50 pages of HOA minutes across his dining table, like he was setting a battlefield. The papers arced from 20 years ago to last month. He moved thumbtacks and red string the way some men dealt cards. At the center sat a single item so ordinary it would have been invisible if not for the handwriting. 14B, resolved. Mark's father's signature looped like rope at the edge of a well. Paul's wife, Ellen, placed a mug of tea by his elbow and didn't tell him he looked obsessed, because obsession had already done too much work to be insulted now. 2 founders are dead, Paul said. A third moved to Florida. The developer folded the LLC and renamed it. Classic. He tapped an address line. Here, warehouse by the quarry. If there were records, they'd be here. Ellen squeezed his shoulder. You're going to the warehouse? After dark, Paul said, and I'm not going alone. He texted the Chuns.
The quarry is a mouth the town forgot to close. The papers you touch still smell like lime and river. Be careful what you pull, Mr. Dawson. Some ropes are tied to throats.
By late afternoon, the wind rose and fell like someone practicing how to breathe. The lake kept its face calm, but that was performance art. Beneath the black, it busied itself with memory. What sank? Who pushed? Which hands trembled after, and which did not? At 5:42 p.m., the community hall lights flickered, came back, and then glowed a half-step too bright like a smile with too many teeth. The folding chairs were set in rows from the morning's meeting that wasn't. Someone had vacuumed. The podium waited, its small brass plaque polished with anxious elbow grease. Harmony in every home, it promised. The Chuns arrived first, each carrying a bag that didn't look like a camera bag, but was. Lena had braided her hair tight against the wind and wore a jacket with too many pockets. Her husband, Wei, set up a small laptop on the last row and angled the screen away. A reflex born of years spent recording things no one wanted recorded. He looked at the emergency exit with the broken alarm light and made a note he didn't read aloud. Mark came early too, with a sheaf of talking points he didn't plan to use, but needed to hold. He asked the custodian to turn down the AC. The custodian said the AC was off. Mark smiled and pretended to be grateful for the cooling breeze whispering from the vents. Residents trickled in with the expressions of people entering a church at a funeral for someone no one liked. They sat with backs too straight and hands too quiet. On the second row, Maria Vasquez clutched a rosary worn smoother than bone. She did not look at the stage. She looked at the ceiling, where the sprinkler heads glinted like a constellation mapped by lawyers. Paul eased in last, hands empty, pockets not. He nodded once to the Chuns and kept moving, sitting in the aisle seat like a man who respects exits. Mark tapped the mic. Thank you all for coming on short notice. The system hissed, a small exhalation, and then settled. We're here to address rumors, Mark continued, voice pitched to a reassuring register that had closed a dozen maintenance arguments and 3 budget tantrums. The recent weather has strained our infrastructure. The lake will be treated. Our insurance carrier has been notified. There is nothing to be alarmed. Tell them what 14B paid for, Paul said, not standing but audible. Tell them what you poured under their boats before there even was a lake. A low ripple, a few nervous laughs, like the air had slipped and stubbed its toe. Mark smiled at the room, not at Paul. Old paperwork is being misinterpreted out of context. Show the context, Lena called from the back voice level. She was already screen mirroring the hall projector to her laptop, fingers moving with a proofreader's certainty. The projector hummed, then stopped, hummed again. The screen glowed gray, then black, then gray, as if the hall had a shy throat. We didn't authorize, Mark began. The screen lit. It wasn't a document, it was a dock. Rain slanted across it in ropes. A girl stepped backward and looked past the lens like she'd heard her name pronounced correctly for the first time. Maria stood so quickly her chair clattered. Turn it off, Mark said. Can't, Wei murmured, not to him. On screen, The lightning that had flashed 100 times since Elena vanished flashed again. The frame caught a face. Then a second, then the water. Not the fall, that cut, just the after. Rain closing the wound the way water does. Because water is the original confidant. For half the room, the image washed over like noise. For the other half, it was a door they'd always known was there, but under wallpaper, they chose not to peel. "Enough," Mark said, and yanked the HDMI cord. The screen stayed on. The projector wasn't using a cable anymore. The source read Lake_Cam Live in a font no one had installed. "Is that?" Someone whispered, "Is that live?" The frame changed. The dock again, but daylight, not storm night. The timestamp ticked forward in real time. At the bottom of the image, a crawl texted itself in letters that ran like wet paint. "Count your votes." Paul met Mark's eyes. "We are."
5 hands 20 years ago, 3 still breathe. 2 hide behind fog and Florida.
Mark swallowed. "We'll adjourn to handle a technical." The fire alarm chirped once and died. A sprinkler head above the stage wept a single, perfect tear. It hung swollen with surface tension, then dropped to the floor with a sound everyone heard, even those who told themselves it was just a pipe. Maria crossed herself. "Hija," she whispered, the word a bridge between present and plural time. "Agenda item 1, Paul said, no microphone. "We remedy the burial." "What burial?" Someone near the front asked, too loud, the way fear often chooses volume when it can't choose courage. "The one under the lake," Paul said. "Barrels, solvents." A developer's problem turned into our children's water. A scatter of denials, a clap of outrage, a shrug of legal words half remembered from HOA pamphlets. "Stop him," a man hissed to Mark. "He's going to tank our property values." Mark, who had once said those exact words about a different problem, made a choice that would look small and be large. He set his notes down. "Paul," he said, "what do you need?" Paul breathed once, surprised by the simple grammar of it. "I need access to the records at the quarry warehouse. The board needs to authorize it, and the community needs to see what's down there. Tonight." Mark hesitated long enough for the hall to write its own versions of his ambition. He nodded. The hall inhaled. "Motion carried," Paul said, "before anyone voted, because some motions carry on their own backs." Mark didn't argue. The chuns packed fast. Maria's rosary tangled and untangled in her fingers, as if it had more knots than prayer could handle. A handful of residents followed the way crowds do when they suspect history prefers witnesses. They caravanned to the quarry at dusk, tail lights threading the old road like a low red river. The sky bruised purple. The wind dropped. When they parked, the silence rang.
I remember this road. I walked it once in daylight and thought the rocks looked like teeth. Be gentle when you pry a mouth.
The warehouse squatted against the quarry lip, the kind of building that always looks temporary and outlives everyone who says so. A chain-link fence girded it, topped with barbed wire that had rusted into the color of dried blood and garden tools. Mark held up a keycard. "My father had this," he said. And if there was apology in the sentence, it was behind too many doors. The gate light dead when they pulled up flickered green. Inside, the air felt 12 degrees colder, the kind of cold that belongs to concrete memory, not weather. The place smelled of paper, oil, and a sweet tang you only notice when you should have noticed sooner. Way panned a flashlight along racks of banker boxes, each labeled with handwriting that had tried not to be handwriting. Site prep, runoff, come messaging, minutes unapproved. The last one hummed in Paul's hand when he lifted it. He told himself it was the vibration from the quarry road. The road told him that was a lie. They lined a folding table with files. Lena set the tripod and pressed record. The first 2 boxes were classic bureaucratic camouflage memos about landscaping, invoices for picnic tables, color proofs of a brochure with a swan no one had ever seen on the lake. The third box bit. Inside, a manila folder scabbed with rust along the brad. 1-4B implementation. Paper clipped to the front. A map of the lake basin before it was a basin. Dotted circles marked containment anomalies. A typed note. Coordinate with waste partner for safe burial. Interim cap. Future cap to be lake liner. Initials below. Emmy not Mark. His father. Paul spread the map. Maria leaned in, hand over her mouth. What's waste partner? Way asked. Another LLC, Paul said. Or a truck with a conscience in the glove compartment. Look, Lena said, tapping a corner of the map where a notation had been whited out and rewritten. In the margin, a sentence faint as regret. Public narrative algae bloom and slick. Blame fertilizer. Mark's jaw worked, no words. Copies, Paul said. Make copies of everything. Then we go to the county. If they won't help, we go to the press. The lights went out, not flickered cut, clean as a switch. There was a metal shuffle in the dark, the noise of something old adjusting its seat. Stay calm, Mark said, which is what people say when calm has already left. A glow bloomed at the far wall, not electric. A slow, low orange, the color of oil catching a memory of flame. Do you smell that? Ellen whispered. She hadn't come to be brave. She was being brave by being there. Solvent, Paul said. Get outside now. He grabbed the file, jammed it under his jacket, ushered Ellen and Maria toward the door. The glow licked higher. Way swung the flashlight. A line of dark seeped from the back corner where the foundation met the floor, running toward the drain like a vein drawing itself. It shone in the light too slick, too eager. Spill kit, Mark said, words from his training for emergencies he never intended to have. He sprinted to a red cabinet and yanked it open. Inside, empty hooks. A label where absorbent pads should have been, removed for inventory. The orange deepened, hungry now, not shy. They ran. Outside, the air hit their chests like forgiveness. The night felt 3 shades cleaner. Behind them, the warehouse windows strobed, a heartbeat in flame. On the roof, something coughed and blew. A tongue of fire tasted the sky and withdrew, uncertain. Sirens rose near and far called by someone, or by the way disasters call their own names. Files, Lena gasped, clutching her bag. I have the worst of it, Paul said, breath hard. Enough. They stood in the gravel and watched the building consider whether to become a lesson or a headline.
Fire is water's impatient cousin. It comes fast and leaves ash where memory should be, but the lake keeps the long archive. What burns on paper floats in me.
While the firefighters worked the building like a puzzle, no one wanted to finish. A patrol car nosed up behind the small crowd that had gathered at a distance. The officer who stepped out had shoulders that said he knew this town too well to like it much. He listened to Paul, then to Mark. He took notes that would become email attachments. He didn't roll his eyes when Mark said, vandalism, but the muscles did something under his cheek that meant the same thing. County Environmental will need to test the lake, the officer said. If there's any chance. Test it tonight, Maria said, voice steady in a way that made men look at their shoes. Test it where the children play with their feet. Ma'am, the officer began, and Maria shook her head once, the way mothers teach men new endings to sentences. Down by the water, the wind turned so softly most missed it. The surface wrinkled, then smoothed. For a moment, the dock reflected the sky in perfect black. Then the first step under the water exhaled a run of bubbles and let up a smell like paint thinner and old rain. Paul pointed. There. The officer followed his hand and paled. Get the booms, he said into his radio. Hazmat. Now. Sirens became a chorus. Mark stared at the lake like it had spoken his baptism name. Julia gripped his sleeve with knuckles gone marble white. Tell them, she said. Tell all of them before she does. He didn't ask who she was. He knew.
You want to be first to tell it, Mark? You should have thought about firsts the night you told me to go home.
Back at the hall, the projector waited in an empty room. No one had turned it off. It didn't need them. The screen now displayed a list none of them had ever seen. Board votes, recorded, unrecorded. Under recorded, neat entries with timestamps. Under unrecorded, 5 lines in dim, dragging type, as if typed by a hand unused to keys. Each line began with yes. Beside each, a name. 2 names were the same as the signatures on 14B. One was Mark's father. One was a man who had died of natural causes 3 summers ago, sitting on a pontoon boat with grandkids who learned how to pronounce stroke before September. At the bottom, a 6th line started to type itself. A blinking cursor, then abstain. The name built letter by letter, Guliaelison. She was still outside, gripping Mark's sleeve, when the cursor changed its mind, backed up and retyped, "Yes, Julia?" Mark asked because the room behind him had just written a piece of time he remembered differently. She closed her eyes. "I was pregnant. Your father said if the lake didn't cover it, the bank would collapse. And you," his voice came out like old rope fraying. "I voted to keep our life," she said. "I didn't know I was voting on someone else's." Maria turned her face toward the sirens and the water and the sky. Paul didn't look away from the dock. He had seen many confessions. Very few contained weather. The wind shifted again. The firefighters had dragged a hazmat boom from the truck and were unrolling it like an orange sentence across the water when the center of the lake hiccuped and produced a small, bright flame the size of a child's candle. It burned for 3 seconds. It went out. No one clapped.
You set the fire. I set the table.
At 3:07 a.m., Alder Creek's phones woke by themselves. The screen on each read emergency HOA session, Lakeside, in the exact font the board used for spring potlucks. No one had sent it. On the dock, a single blue glass bead rested on the first step above the waterline, shining with the patient light of something that had waited long enough. The hall projector still humming in the empty room switch feeds. It showed a close-up of the bead, then pulled back to reveal a second, then a third, set neatly at even intervals like place settings down the dock. A line of text scrolled across the bottom of the screen in letters that dripped and then held. OA Rule Number 1, amended. The dead have a vote. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a door opened. Then another and another, the small serial courage of people who don't want to be first, but are tired of being last. The lake flattened its face in welcome, and under that face, old barrels sighed. Not exploding, not cracking, just shifting, as if making room at a crowded table. At 3:07 a.m., Alder Creek learned that rules could ring like church bells. Doors opened up and down the street, the way wheat bends in one direction when the wind decides. People stepped out in pajamas and raincoats, clutching phones that had woken them with an invitation no one sent and everyone recognized. Emergency, HOA session, Lakeside. No RSVP required. The lake expects you. The dock looked like a table laid for judgment. Blue glass beads marked the boards at even intervals, catching moonlight like thawing ice. Hazmat booms floated in cautious orange arcs, tethered to shore by ropes that hummed against cleats. The smell in the air had shifted from solvent bitter to something older mud and metal, and a damp quiet that suggested the ground was listening with its whole body. Mark Ellison arrived rigid, a suit jacket thrown over a t-shirt, the look of a man trying to dress his way out of a nightmare. Julia walked beside him, hair pinned back like a confession readying itself. Paul Dawson stood already at the foot of the dock with the chuns, elbows locked, face turned toward the black center where the water reflected nothing it couldn't keep. "Let's do this fast," Mark said, which is not a sentence that ever belonged to truth. "We go as long as the water lets us," Paul answered. Phones at the crowd's edges blinked awake again in unison. The lock screens displayed a new line in that careful HOA font, roll call. Beneath it, founders, 06 present, 3. A murmur moved through the cluster of neighbors like static over wool. 3? Someone whispered. I thought 2 were dead. 3 present, Lena Chun repeated softly, eyes on the lake. Not 3 alive, the wind turned. The beads on the dock brightened, one at a time, as if someone passed a light down a line of cupped hands.
Sit, the chairs are water, you won't fall. Speak. The room is dark, you won't be seen. Vote. The dead have waited long enough.
Paul took the first step onto the dock. The board under his foot felt colder than wood has any right to be. He raised his voice, not because the lake needed volume, but because people do. 20 years ago, a vote buried barrels under this basin. Tonight, we take a new vote to dig the truth back up. Mark stepped forward to object and didn't. His jaw worked, a counting of teeth, a silent prayer for a different life. From the crowd, Mr. Rawlings, a realtor who had sold half these homes, tried on a reasonable tone. We appreciate your passion, but let's keep perspective. We don't know what the barrels are. We don't know if any. A bubble rose near the first hazmat boom and popped with a sound like a knuckle cracking in church. The orange line shivered. The realtor took a half step back and dropped his reasonable tone like a hot plate. Paul lifted both hands like a conductor. Board members and former board families to the front. Mark and Julia moved. So did Mrs. Liddy, gray-haired, slippered, shoulders squared with the practiced posture of a woman who learned long ago how to meet trouble at the door. A hush went through the crowd at her face. On the HOA website, she was a smiling archive photo under a caption that said First Treasurer. Tonight she looked like a ledger that refused to balance. Paul nodded to her. Mrs. Liddy, you served with Mark's father when 14B passed. She didn't blink. That's right. And you voted? She looked past him at the lake. We all did. Why? Because he told us it was safer than leaving them open. She tilted her head in the direction of the quarry, which now glowed faintly on the horizon, stitched with the blue-red thread of first responders. He said capping it with the lake liner would trap everything for good. The county would never look. The neighborhood would thrive. He? Paul asked. She exhaled, the developer's fixer. Name on paper, said Evan Graft. The man who came to the meetings was never the same face twice. A ripple passed through the half-asleep crowd. Some things sound like folklore until the wind nods yes. Mark raised his hands. We're not here to litigate. We are, Julia said. Her voice trembled, then steadied on a cruelty she reserved for herself. We're here to confess. Mark stared at her, the way a man stares at the unexpected last line of a love letter. I voted yes, she said to the dock, the boom, the bead, the assembled hunger. I abstained first. Then I changed. Your father told me a collapse could take the whole cul-de-sac. Julia, Mark's voice broke down the middle. You were pregnant. I was a coward. She looked up and found Maria Vasquez, whose face had become a geography of storms. I don't ask for forgiveness, not from you. Maria held her gaze and didn't answer with words. She simply wrapped her rosary around her hand twice, a double tourniquet. The projector at the empty community hall hummed into life again without an audience and across the glass of 100 awake phones. That feed arrived, the dock view, jitterless, as if mounted on the night itself. At the bottom, a new crawl. Conflict of interest. Declared, undeclared. A list began to type itself. Contracts, consulting fees, a son's first summer job at a waste transport yard, washing down hoses that glistened with 4 SILE signs where conscience should have been. Mark flinched. My father's work. Your father's legacy, Paul cut in, is the poison, not the paycheck. A breathless voice near the back. We're going to be on the news. We should have been on the news 20 years ago, Lena said, eyes never leaving the screen. We built a neighborhood over a secret and called it a master plan. A police siren dopplered closer. The county environmental unit trudged down the slope, loaded with kits, booms, meters. A woman and waiters took one look at the sheen sliding under the first step and said only, "Well, hell." She eyed the gathering, the hour, the way a community had arranged itself to be judged. Who's in charge? Paul and Mark both opened their mouths and then didn't. A small, tired smile landed in the corner of the woman's face. "Right," she said. "Everybody and nobody." She turned to her team. "Pull samples at the booms, midline, and where she's shining." "Where who's shining?" a tech asked. The woman pointed at the blue bead on the step. "The lighthouse." No one laughed. The word felt right. They dropped bottles on cords into the black and drew them up full of night. The tech lifted one to the flood lamp. A faint rainbow trembled on the surface that had nothing to do with joy. "Volatiles," the woman said. "Don't light anything." "Arson at the warehouse," Paul said. Her jaw hardened. "Convenient." Julia reached for Mark's hand. "Tell them the rest." He closed his eyes and opened them on another man's face. The man on the dock, the night Elena vanished, dropped in lightning for exactly one frame. "I was there," he said. "The night Elena," he couldn't say drowned. The lake doesn't like that word. "The night she went under." A sound went through the crowd that wasn't entirely surprise. "Why?" Paul asked. "She texted me," Mark said. "No, I thought she did." Official banner, scholarship meeting. It was the HOA template. But it wasn't us. It came from a cloned list. A number tied to one of the developer's old vendors. The same fixer Mrs. Liddy just named. They used our brand to bring her to the dock. "Then why didn't you stop it?" Maria's voice was gravel rolled in a palm. "If you knew the trap, why did you walk her in?" Mark swallowed. "Because I thought I could talk her out of filing a complaint." She'd been seen near the quarry. Elena was persistent, smart. She'd written down truck plates, dates. I was supposed to keep the neighborhood out of trouble. I told myself if I convinced her to bring it to me quietly, we'd fix it. Without panic, without press. And when she fell? Paul asked. "I jumped," Mark said. His body said otherwise. "The lake remembers angles." Another man was their security contractor, wearing a hood. He grabbed me. "Side, we'll handle it." He loosened the rope. The dock pitched. She went under. I went to dive. He dragged a hand across his face. He held me. Said if I jumped, we both drown. That she'd already. The word failed him again, and rightly so. He told me to go home. He said the HOA had already voted on bigger things. This was just paperwork. "You let them write her down as paperwork," Maria said quietly. The environmental officer raised a hand, not to silence anyone, but to mark the exact second the lake gave an answer. In the midline sample bottle, a tiny flame winked blue and blew itself out. "How does water do that?" a neighbor whispered. "It doesn't," the officer said. "The air above it does." A child at the back began to cry the soft hitching cry. That means a nightmare has finally found its voice. Her mother picked her up and held her toward the dark like an apology. Paul turned to Julia. "Why put your name on the abstain and then change it?" Julia's knuckles whitened. "Because I heard a story about a sinkhole outside Tampa that ate a living room whole. Because your father pointed at our unborn son and said, 'If that ground liquefies, what good is your virtue?' Because I was afraid of a hole in the earth and didn't know I was making one in a girl's life. Because everyone in this place has been taught to worship the appearance of safety more than safety." The phones lit again. Vote, remediate, resist. 2 buttons, no third option. The kind of clarity people say they want until they have it. Mrs. Liddy lifted her slippered foot and placed it on the first step. The bead beside it pulsed. "Remediate," she said, and pressed the word with an arthritic thumb. One by one, people chose. The screen on the hall projector tallied them with the patience of a ledger and the hunger of a storm. Remediate, 61. Resist, 7. Abstain, 0. The number pulsed and held. The bead on the second step brightened as if approving a paragraph. Motion carries, Paul said softly. We dig. And if the county balks? Way asked. We sue, Lena said. We leak. We organize. We keep the projector fed until they come in daylight. A neighbor who had never spoken at a meeting before raised his hand like a child. If the barrels are broken, won't digging make it worse? The environmental officer answered without looking away from her meter. Sometimes you have to make it worse to make it true. We can cap, overpump, cut trenches. But I won't sign off on anything that buries this again. The wind freshed. Something in the middle distance swelled. The third bead flared, then slid gently forward and dropped into the water with a sound like a single clean tear. Hands flew to mouths. The ripple traveled to the hazmat boom. The orange line steadied. A voice rose from behind the crowd. Older and iron. You haven't asked what the lake votes. Mrs. Liddy again, eyes on the black. We've made so many decisions over her face. Paul opened his mouth to say lakes don't vote. The lake answered for itself. The dockboards, dry a moment earlier, spat up a row of tiny bubbles in a line, like punctuation. On 100 phones, a new screen appeared. Lake, yes. No one laughed. Of course it can't type. And yet.
You wanted a quorum. You have one now. One more vote remains.
While the tally steadied, a white SUV glided to the cul-de-sac curb, lights off, windows dark. It parked without hurry. The driver remained a silhouette with posture like money. Evan Graft had 100 faces and none. This one wore a beard that could be shaved in 2 minutes into another man. He stepped out as if the pavement had asked, shoes barely darkened by damp. 2 men climbed from the back private security without badges, the kind who ask favors of uniforms and get them. Mark tensed. Paul's hand found his pocket and the small medal tucked there. Evan offered a smile that had sold a dozen zoning variances. Good morning, neighbors. Let's dial down the theatrics. A small incident at a storage facility has everyone jumpy. Our firm is here to assist. Your firm lit the incident, the environmental officer said, not bothering to hide contempt. Step back from my scene. Your scene? Evan's smile warmed fraudulently. This is private property. No, Paul said. This is a crime scene. Evan's eyes found the projector glow reflected on a dozen wet surfaces. He tilted his head like a man appraising a chandelier. Cute trick with the mirroring. You've all been very engaged. From the dark, a low sound rolled thunder, or a truck on the highway, or something moving that shouldn't. The hazmat booms bumped twice, then settled. Evan took 1 step onto the dock. The bead near his toe brightened to a fever blue. He paused. Turn around, Maria said, voice ablade. Say her name. He smiled wider. Which one? The dock tilted not much, but enough to rearrange the balance of how one stands when the world refuses to be flat. Evan grabbed the post. Water climbed the first step as if a tide clock had clicked. Careful, Paul said. The lake votes. That's not how, Evan began. Something answered under the dock with a hollow thump, barrel moving against barrel, memory shifting in its sleep. The sound traveled through wood into shoes, through shoes into bone. Evan lost the sentence. The private security men shifted their weight and found the edge of an instinct they thought they'd outgrown. Leave, the environmental officer said. Now, Evan exhaled through his nose, the way men do when they aren't used to being told. We'll see you in court. That's the plan, Lena said. He lingered half a second too long. The bead near his shoe hissed a tiny thread of steam and went out. He stepped back with the choreography of retreat, practiced as grace. The SUV's doors received them like secrets. The car left the way it came without lights. as if the night had signed an NDA. The phones blinked. Founders, 6, present, 4. A fourth name surfaced beneath the number, a deed lawyer who had retired to Arizona and, if the lake could be believed, had just checked in. 4, someone breathed. But we won't be alone, Paul said. He didn't mean the court.
You buried me like a meeting note. Now I'm minutes you cannot adjourn.
The tally froze at remediate. The bead lights went out, and the dark returned the dock to wood. On the far side, the orange booms made a careful parenthesis around the wound. At exactly 3:27 a.m., the projector in the empty hall switched to a new slide, a clean, white page with 3 lines. HOA Rule Number 2, amended. Appearance is not safety. HOA Rule Number 3, new. We dig in daylight. HOA Rule Number 4, pending. Sentence to be decided. The last line flickered as if being set by a jury. A cursor blinked in the white. On the dock, a 5th bead rolled out of the dark and tapped against Paul's shoe. He picked it up in a shaking hand, looked at the lake the way a man looks at a courtroom, and nodded. Daylight, he said. Alder Creek looked at the water, at each other, at the parts of themselves they had outsourced to rulebooks. Then, in ones and twos, they went home to wait for the sun to show what the dark had done. Back at the center of the lake, something very old turned over quietly, like a body learning how to breathe again. Dawn split Alder Creek into 2 colors, the pale honesty of the sky and the darker honesty of the water. The houses looked smaller in the new light, as if the night had quietly removed several inches of pride from every roofline. The dock waited without ornament, stripped of beads and ceremony. Now just boards and bolts, and the quiet pulse beneath like a chest whose breathing you could see. County trucks idled along the curb. A backhoe blinked its hazard lights in patient orange. The environmental officer, who had slept 0 minutes and regretted none, moved like a conductor through a thick orchestra of hoses, booms, corers, and clipboards. The sheen on the lake was quieter now, but no less real. A whisper that had run all night and lost only volume, not argument. Neighbors gathered with coffee instead of candles. You could tell who had been up since the sirens by the way they watched the water chin up, eyes half closed, like they were listening to a language they almost remembered. Paul Dawson stood beside the backhoe operator and traced a rectangle in the air with his hand. Start shallow, we don't want a tear. We want to uncover. Mark Ellison stood 3 steps back, jacket buttoned, tie straight, face unshaven. Julia beside him had braided her hair into order her voice could not yet manage. Maria Vasquez stood nearest the shore, rosary wrapped around her palm twice, then once more, as if she were binding something to herself and letting something else go. A hush fell as the backhoe bucket lowered toward the first marked point. The steel teeth bit earth as if into a crust over a deep pie. The operator lifted a slice mud, roots, a glint of trash, and set it to the side. A second scoop. The smell shifted. The crowd flinched as one animal, oil paint thinner. Summer in a garage with the door closed. Stop, the officer said. Boom placement first. Slow the air monitors. The techs moved like they'd rehearsed with ghosts. The orange booms nested closer, ropes cinched, pads unfurled with the quick origami of emergency. The bucket went in again deeper. When it rose, something knocked the underside with a hollow sound that traveled through steel and up the operator's arms. Got you, the operator said, not softly and not loudly. Like a fisherman who respects his catch. Mud sluiced off the shape until it showed itself. A barrel, black, ridged, old as a bad promise. Flaking paint revealed a stenciled set of numbers and a symbol the EPA made famous in the 80s, and neighborhoods never learned to love. Do not breach, the officer warned. Lift intact, cradle straps. If it weeps, we seal and overpump. As the straps went on, a murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Liddy, slippered and stubborn, put one hand to her throat as if testing the weight of confession there. Count, Paul said to a tech with a tablet. 1, the tech said, eyes flicking to a grid the Chuns had rendered from old survey lines. Should be 7 at this depth if the map is honest. Maps lie, Lena said, but the lake doesn't. The second barrel came up slower, the strap squealing against rust. The third rose with mud-like black icing clinging to its sides. The fourth knocked the bucket again with a musical hollow that made 2 teenagers gasp despite themselves. That was when Evan Graft returned. He didn't bring security this time. He brought a lawyer in a blue suit that made clouds look sloppy. The lawyer lifted his chin and announced the word injunction, as if he were naming a god. Evan let the word go first and followed behind it like a priest carrying incense. The environmental officer didn't smile. You can file paper. We'll keep digging. That's spoliation of evidence, the lawyer replied. No, Paul said. That's evidence. Evan's eyes tracked the barrels one by one. He did not hide the calculation on his face. Chain of custody will be a nightmare. Not as bad as a chain around a neighborhood's throat, Lena said. Julia took a step forward. Mr. Graft, she said, voice flat. Say her name. His smile never reached his eyes. Which one? He asked, the way he had asked last night. Maria answered by stepping to the very edge of the water. Elena, she said. Her name is Elena. The water rippled at the sound the way a dog flicks an ear when called by a beloved who has been gone too long.
Here, Mama, not where you left me, where they left me. Lift me, without breaking. I am heavier than a body and lighter than a secret.
Barrel 5 surfaced with a sigh like a held note finally released. The monitor chirped a warning: volatiles up, oxygen down. The officer tightened protocols with gestures that had become muscle memory overnight. 2 more, the tech said. The 6th barrel, when lifted, revealed beneath it not smooth earth but a grin of fractured concrete. The operator set the bucket down and scraped carefully. The wall of a trench emerged old, poured thin, lined with plastic that had crisped to the texture of dead leaves. Somebody had tried to make a coffin for a problem too restless to accept burial. Jesus, the operator breathed, and the word hung there without offense. The 7th barrel rose halfway and stuck, refusing the strap. The operator tried a different angle. The strap bit and then slipped. The barrel tipped, knocked the boom, spun. The crowd sucked air. Don't let it breach, the officer called, voice very calm in a way that could make a bridge stop swaying. Low and cradle. A 2nd strap went on, then a 3rd, and slowly, like a sentence corrected mid-utterance, the cylinder lifted. At that exact second, a gust moved across the lake from the far shore to the near, like someone exhaling after being underwater too long. Phones along the dock, lit in sequence like runway lights. On each screen, a feed from the community hall woke to show a white page and 3 lines of text. HOA Rule Number 4. Final. Tell the whole truth and let IT cost. Sentence. Public. Enforcement. Continuous. What does continuous mean? A neighbor whispered, as if the word had teeth. It means we don't stop when the cameras do, Paul said. The backhoe set barrel 7 onto a waiting skid. The officer signaled her team, package and transport. We impound these under state seal. Chain of custody goes county state ag. Evan's lawyer began to say, overreach, and found his voice wouldn't produce the word. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was the feeling underfoot, that subtle shift of ground when the earth decides it's done holding your lies. Next grid, the tech called. They moved 20 feet. The first bite of the bucket struck not a barrel, but something hollow and squared. The operator feathered pressure, the way you tap a sleeping child, then lifted a black plastic crate. Inside, file boxes triple wrapped in painter's plastic, the tape melted into amber tears. The crowd made a sound that has no spelling, a mixture of triumph and nausea. Paul's hands shook as he slit the plastic with a pocket knife. He pulled a folder, peeled apart its pages. The ink had bled but not died, Invoices, disposal manifests, text message prints, photographs in sleeves, trucks at night, license plates. A man with a hood turned 3/4 from the camera on a dock. Copy station, Lena said, already unrolling a battery printer from a canvas bag like a magician producing a dove. Are you kidding me? The lawyer said. We do our own chain, she replied. Parallel. Redundancy is what saves you when men like you light warehouses. Mark reached for a photo with 2 fingers, as if the ink might burn. It was a shot of the dock in rain, the hooded man's gloved hand on his sleeve. You could see Mark's open mouth, alert, frightened, not brave enough. Behind him, a reflection that isn't water, because water doesn't hold a face that's steady. His shoulders shook once, a small tremor that traveled to Julia's hand and made her grip him harder. Say it, she whispered. I was there, he said, and I didn't stop them. Say the rest. I will testify, he said louder. Everything I have, board minutes, text logs, who paid, who signed. I'll denounce my father's legacy in front of every camera in this county. He looked at Maria. I will say her name. Maria nodded once, slowly, as if her neck had to relearn the motion after a year of only shaking no. Evan's lawyer finally found a sentence. My client denies. A bullfrog croaked from the shallows. Another answered. The sound undercut the lawyer's polished consonants with a music older than affidavits. Evan glanced at the barrels, then the crate, then at the hardware in a tech's hand. A field spectrometer blinking results no one wanted to read in a neighborhood newsletter. His face did a small arithmetic. What can be bought? What can be buried? What can be blamed? He came up with the wrong sum and smiled. We'll settle, he said. No, Maria said. We'll testify. No, Paul said. We'll prosecute. No, the environmental officer said. We'll remediate. No, Lena said, nodding to the hall's feet on a dozen phones. We'll publish. The neighbor with the question about continuous exhaled like a man who'd been strapped under a boat and just found the surface.
You are learning the grammar of truth. It costs verbs first, then names, then futures you thought you owned. Keep going.
By afternoon, the cul-de-sac looked like a pop-up field lab. Tripods spiked the grass. Evidence tents sprouted like small white prayers. Media vans arrived in careful predatory arcs, satellites unfurling like silver flowers. Reporters rehearsed the phrase, toxic burial, and tried to make it sound new. Paul stood at the folding table with the crate of plastic-wrapped records. He addressed 3 cameras and the unblinking eye of the lake beyond them. He explained 14B, the developer's fixer, the vote, the cover story, the scholarship text bait that cloned HOA branding. He said Elena's name into each microphone, as if nailing it to a door. Mark followed. He did not read. He did not hedge. He spoke like a man standing in front of a hole he had dug and decided to climb into instead of lying about shovels. He named his father. He named the vendor. He named himself. He ended with, I'm resigning effective now. I will cooperate fully. A reporter, like a gull who smells a softer kind of blood, called out, Are you afraid of prison? Mark looked at Maria before answering. I'm afraid of my son learning to love the wrong kind of safety. The question landed and didn't bounce. Mrs. Liddy walked up to a camera without asking permission and delivered a history lesson that would have made a boardroom cry if boardrooms could cry. We were told the barrels were inert when capped. We were told the lake liner was gold standard. We were told dissent was hysterical and urgency was bad manners. We were wrong. Write it down. The environmental officer, not one for speeches, summarized numbers. We've got solvent signatures consistent with TCE and friends. This will be months to years. We're closing the lake today. We'll trench, overpump, cap, and monitor. And if anyone on a golf cart tells you it's fine tomorrow, it isn't. We'll tell you when it's fine and not a minute before. The crowd applauded like tired people who finally heard sense. Through it all, Evan tried to leave. He found his SUV boxed by trucks and cameras. He smiled without teeth and slipped away on foot, a man allergic to daylight. He didn't make it to the quarry road. The sheriff's cruiser nosed across his path as gently as a shepherd's dog. The deputy who stepped out read from a paper that used the word conspiracy, and then evidence tampering, and then involuntary manslaughter. Pending. Evan's face performed outrage. The cuffs performed closure. The cameras performed hunger. The lake performed quiet. Maria didn't watch the arrest. She knelt by the water and whispered one word into the ripple over and over until it changed from prayer into punctuation.
Mama, I hear you. Keep saying it until it becomes a door.
Evening slid in soft. The day too used up to dramatize itself further. The booms held like careful hands. The barrel sat labeled under a blue canopy with chain of custody forms clipped tight as lips. The crate of records, now scanned twice and uploaded thrice, lived simultaneously in more places than secrets could reach. In the community hall, the projector at last found its audience. The neighbors filed in less perfumed than yesterday, more awake. A new slide already glowed on the screen. HOA Rule Number 5 new. Dissolve and begin again. Action. Dissolution vote. Now. Mark didn't take the podium. Paul did. Motion to dissolve Alder Creek, HOA. Transfer interim safety authority to the county. Establish a resident council with no financial discretion until remediation is complete. And convert the hall to a public records center. It was a brutal sentence, clean, bleeding, correct. Second, said Mrs. Liddy. Phones vibrated. Buttons appeared. Dissolve, delay. People chose like grown-ups in a room with nothing left to pretend about. Dissolve, 74. Delay, 3. The number settled like a stone that has been looking for the right pond for a very long time. Maria stood then, not for a speech, but a naming. We will build a memorial by the first step of the dock, she said. With the names of those who said yes to truth, and the one name that makes it matter. Her voice softened, Elena. Silence carried the word to every corner. You could hear the lake breathe at the door. Julia walked to Maria and held out something on her open palm, a necklace, the blue glass pendant, washed and bright. It was on the step, she whispered. It rolled to my shoe. Maria took it like taking a hand after a long fight and a longer night.
It looks smaller in her hand, but it is not smaller. It is exactly the size of what I needed to return.
No thunder marked the moment. No lights flickered. The projector simply faded to a quiet white, as if the screen itself had exhaled and decided to rest. Later, after the county taped off the dock and the press trucks left, and the sky finally admitted it was dark, Paul walked alone to the lake's edge. He had promised Ellen he wouldn't, but promises made to people who love you sometimes defer to promises made to people you failed. He stood where the first step drowned and said, "Without drama, we'll keep it public," he added. "I'm sorry I wrote accident when I should have written crime," he added softer. "I should have been braver sooner." The water didn't part. It did something smaller and better. It tightened the ripples around his shoes into circles so neat they could have been drawn with a compass. From the street above, children's laughter floated like a language the lake still wanted to learn again. Not tonight, but again. Maria came then, moving slow because grief teaches you to be deliberate. She unclasped the necklace and held it just above the water, letting the pendant almost touch. "Do I keep it?" she asked the lake without moving her lips. "Or do I give it back?" The answer arrived not in words but in the change of weight in her hand. The pendant grew suddenly lighter, as if some of its gravity had gone home. Maria smiled, the first true smile since the night Hope texted with a forged banner. She put the necklace on. "Stay," she said, "but not to the lake, to the parts of Elena that now lived in ways you cannot bury." Behind them, footsteps. Mark and Julia approached the waterline and didn't come any closer. They didn't ask for absolution. They didn't get it. What they got was daylight, which sticks harder. Mark said, "Tomorrow I'll sit for a sworn statement." "Good," Paul said. Julia said, "And I'll sit beside him and tell them when I said yes." She looked at Maria. "You won't ever have to ask what happened again. You'll read it." Maria nodded. "I'll read it to her," she said, tapping the pendant. "Every page." The wind shifted off the lake the way a sleeping house shifts on its foundations, small, real, promising.
You dug, you named, you paid, now I am something new, not gone, and not only grief. I am the rule you keep when no one is watching.
A week later, backhoes carved careful veins through the soil, and pumps drew out water that smelled less like alibis by the day. The crate of records lived under glass in the hall that used to be for bake sales and now was for truth. A bronze plaque went up by the dock with 5 lines. OA Rule Number 0, the water keeps receipts. Rule Number 1, the dead have a vote. Rule Number 2, appearance is not safety. Rule Number 3, we dig in daylight. Rule Number 4, tell the whole truth and let it to cost. Below them, one more line, not numbered. In memory of Elena Vasquez, we remember you when it rains. Sometimes at 3:07 a.m., phones no longer pinch. Sprinklers stayed quiet. The lake lay still, not because it had nothing left to say, but because someone had finally learned how to listen before it had to shout. The neighborhood did not become perfect. It became awake. Grass grew ragged near the trench lines, and no one apologized. Children pointed at the lab tents and called them castles. Teenagers learned where to find county filings. Men who once loved budgets more than names learned to love both. And when the weather turned, the wind carried no whispers that had to be translated. On a gray morning full of honest clouds, a blue heron stepped into the shallows and stood like a note held without vibrato. Everyone took it as a sign, because some signs are true precisely because we decide to let them be. Paul and Ellen ate sandwiches on the back steps and did not talk about retirement. The Chuns posted the scanned archive with a caption that read, "Public means public." Mrs. Liddy taught a class in the hall called How to Read a Budget Like a Novel. The environmental officer smiled once, privately, when a test strip went a color that meant fewer children would say, "Headache near the water." At sunset, Maria walked to the dock wearing the blue glass pendant. She touched the first step with her shoe and felt the old, gentle push of water that now kept nothing it shouldn't. She whispered a name to the ripples. They answered with light, just a small shimmer like a bead roll into a shoe, and then stilled. Alder Creek took a breath. Somewhere far below the place where barrels used to dream, the lake made space the way it always had for the things people finally had the courage to let go. And when it rained, which it did, because no rule can stop weather, the porch lights flickered warm, not red. Windows fogged, and on one pane in house number 14, a single word appeared in clean, wet strokes. "Remember." Julia laid her hand against the glass, palm to palm with the condensation, and said, "We will." Mark turned off the old alarm that had learned a new hour for fear and opened the door to the honest night. The lake kept its receipts. The town kept its promise. The dead kept their vote and at last rested.